This April, the BBC Trust censured Middle East correspondent Jeremy Bowen for comments he made on the BBC website about the history of the conflict. We can reveal that a week earlier, the Jewish Chronicle published a piece by Bowen which included exactly the same phrases. You can still read them on the Jewish Chronicle website. But Camera, the American-based media watchdog which earlier had complained about The Guardian, this time formally complained to the BBC. Then a London lawyer complained. The BBC was forced to investigate.
The BBC investigated Jeremy Bowen because they were under such extraordinary pressure. The way that that investigation was perceived by Bowen's colleagues, if you like, in the BBC, was that this was management hoping with one bound to be free from what was very, very intensive pressure, but it struck a chill through the actual BBC newsroom because it signalled to them that they were under assault.
Do you think the BBC would have carried out that investigation into Bowen but for this Israeli pressure which you've been talking about?
No, of course they wouldn't have done.
Veteran BBC presenter Jonathan Dimbleby thought the BBC had caved in.
Not only has Bowen's hard-won reputation been sullied, but the BBC's international status as the best source of trustworthy news in the world has been gratuitously undermined.
When we approached Dimbleby, he refused to take part in this programme. We can reveal that he too is now under investigation for making the above comments. The BBC Trust sent a representative to Oxford to question Professor Schleim about the accuracy of Jeremy Bowen's piece.
I couldn't fault him. I didn't see where he had gone wrong, and my conclusions from this affair is that there are some people in the Jewish community in Britain who listen to the news, monitor the news, and are too quick to start protesting to the BBC. Their complaints are usually unjustified.
It was time to find out who Honest Reporting UK is, who funds it, and who it represents. First surprise, its office is not in Britain, but here in Jerusalem. Its managing editor, Simon Plosker, who is British, admits he worked for Vicom in London and also for the Israel Army press office.
Hi, is this Honest Reporting?
Yes, it is.
Peter Oborne from Channel 4 Television.
Simon Plosker wasn't around, and the people there didn't want to speak on his behalf.
You can ask me.
I've just had a conversation with the bloke inside that office. I said, is this the office of Honest Reporting? He said, well, difficult that. We work for a project of Honest Reporting, but as for Honest Reporting itself, it's kind of a virtual organisation.
I still wanted to talk to Simon Plosker about why he ceaselessly attacks the BBC and who he works for. He declined to be interviewed, but gave us this statement.
We don't target the UK media. It is simply that the demonisation of Israel in the media here is that much worse than it is in other places, such as the USA. The BBC and The Guardian produce examples of anti-Israel bias on a more regular basis than others.
The BBC isn't just a programme maker. It has another role as lead broadcaster of emergency appeals to raise funds for our disaster relief agencies to provide humanitarian aid in world catastrophes. It's done so for the last 40 years in conflicts around the world. Last winter, when Israeli forces invaded Gaza, over 1,000 Palestinians were killed, many of them civilians. Hundreds of homes were destroyed, along with much of Gaza's economy and infrastructure. The Disasters Emergency Committee asked British television networks to broadcast an appeal, but Mark Thompson, the BBC's Director General, refused. Labour Minister for Media, former BBC journalist Ben Bradshaw, was outraged.
This was an inexplicable decision. I'm afraid the BBC has to stand up to the Israeli authorities occasionally. Israel has a long reputation of bullying the BBC.
We decided in the end it was such a matter of public controversy, it was so much heading our news bulletins day after day at the moment, that to broadcast an appeal like this, however worthy the cause, would just mean that it would call into question audiences' trust in our impartiality.
The BBC also said that Thompson had taken advice from the BBC's Independent Appeals Advisory Committee before making his decision. Niaz Alam was a member of that committee. He resigned over Thompson's decision.
What was said exaggerates the truth of whatever consultation took place. The committee didn't formally meet and wasn't consulted in the sense of the committee being consulted.
What about the argument that the appeal would call into question the BBC's impartiality?
This appeal, it did go out on Channel 4 and on ITV, and nobody's questioning their impartiality. It was just a bog-standard disaster emergency appeal.
The children of Gaza are suffering. Today, this is not about the rights and wrongs of the conflict. These people simply need your help.
The Disasters Emergency Committee refuses to talk in public. So we asked the members of the DEC whether they would talk only about humanitarian need in Gaza and how they assessed it. But Christian Aid, the Catholic agency Cathod, Save the Children and Oxfam all said it was just too sensitive.
Do you think the Israeli lobby was responsible for the decision not to have the Gaza appeal?
Turn it around, it wouldn't have been a serious concern for them if they didn't have that pressure from an extraordinarily active, sophisticated and persuasive lobby sticking up for the Israeli viewpoint.
We have also discovered that the BBC's Gaza decision is exceptional in the light of past appeals.
It's far less controversial than perhaps an appeal in 1982 for victims of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And yet the BBC had no trouble doing an appeal in those days.
In 1982, Israel's invasion of Lebanon led to thousands of civilian deaths and ended with the horrendous slaughter of Palestinian men, women and children in Sabra and Shatila refugee camps by Lebanese Christian militia who were Israel's allies at the time. Here's Sue Lawley as the face of the BBC in that appeal.
The situation looks beyond help, but we can help. We can help by supporting the work of the relief agencies who are now fighting a desperate battle in the towns and villages of the Lebanon. So please send whatever you can to the Lebanon Appeal, P.O. Box 999.
Looking at that appeal from 25 years ago, Mark Thompson's decision not to run an appeal for Gaza looks inconsistent. It looks to me as if the BBC has come dangerously close to losing its reputation for impartiality and for helping those in need around the world, whoever they are.
What's unique about the pro-Israeli lobbies is that they have such good access to politicians. They often operate behind the scenes, and they have primary regard, even though they may come from Britain, not to the interests of the British people, but to a mixture of what they see as British interests, but the interests of another country.
In making this programme, we haven't found anything even faintly resembling a conspiracy, but we have found a worrying lack of transparency, and the influence of the pro-Israel lobby continues to be felt.